Lars Feld is a professor at the Walter Eucken Institute in Freiburg. Joins us on the phone. Thanks very much indeed for your time. So how close could Greece be to default?
Yeah, good morning. What we know from the figures that define the Greek situation, it is pretty clear that the decisions of July will not suffice to bring Greece back to a normal path, a healthy path of fiscal policy. Therefore, a haircut will be necessary at one point in time. And the question simply is when it's going to be and when everybody is prepared to do that. This is something I have said for many months, and the Council of Economic Experts has published a piece in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung last July saying that the haircut of 50% is going to be necessary.
Does that sound accurate or at least realistic to you?
Well, when you think about a situation that we currently have, I can understand that the Finance Ministry is thinking more seriously about having a restructuring of a larger restructuring of Greece rather now than later.
So is there any way that this haircut of 50% or indeed more, is there any way a haircut can be avoided at this point? Can anything be done to alleviate the pain for investors?
There's one thing or one part that needs to be taken into account is that when Greece is able to fulfill its obligations until the end of this month, and the Troika is going back and it is certifying that the possibilities Greece can take have been taken. Then the second package will be able to start and will perhaps help Greece to gain additional time. But nevertheless, as I said, this will not suffice in the end. So then it's simply postponing a restructuring a few further months, and then it has to take place, say, in spring next year or in summer next year. What you can observe in both instances, either when we have restructuring during this month or when we have restructuring sometime next year, is the longer we wait, the larger will be the share of public creditors towards Greece. And then, of course, private investors will feel a lower burden of the restructuring.
I mean, we're getting increasing reports, Mr. Feld, of a German plan B, if you like, to protect its own banks and insurers from a possible haircut of up to 50% on their Greek bond holdings. Does Germany indeed have a plan B, or is this Schäuble's way of putting pressure on Greece?
It is both, perhaps. He is putting pressure on Greece on the one hand, but I'm sure, and I would expect that from my government as well, that they are playing through all the different alternatives. They must be prepared for something happening that they didn't want to have in the first place. If they hadn't something like that, I don't know what's going to unravel in an unorderly fashion.
So
and that's
how would you describe then the German government's thinking right now? Is it that a default is inevitable and we have to start putting a plan in place to protect our guys, to protect our financial institutions?
Well, I'm not so sure whether the government thinks that the default is actually inevitable. In July, they still thought it would be feasible to have simply a prolongation of Greek government bonds and Greek government debt. The thing is that the further Greece is hesitating to fulfill its obligations, the more probable default is going to become. And this is something that the government is also realizing.
I mean, if you look at the numbers, it is looking increasingly likely, it does look increasingly like it's going to be difficult for Greece to meet those targets. It's the same dilemma that we've been talking about all year, if not longer than that. The idea that, okay, you can have austerity measures, but that's going to shave a certain amount off GDP that effectively prevents you from meeting those targets. So I mean, there must be a plan B in place, right? What does the German plan B look like?
This is something I cannot say exactly. I think they are discussing, on one part, an orderly restructuring along the lines that we have proposed last July. which would mean a haircut of 50%, trying to make a containment to Greece, being sure that the contagion is not spreading across the whole financial sector, and that it's not spreading to Portugal and Ireland, and it's not spreading to Spain and Italy. This is one thing, but they must also be prepared for an unorderly restructuring that could take place as well. So it might be that something is going on in Greece that nobody in the Eurozone, no government actually wants to have, and then they must be prepared for that as well.
What will a disorderly restructuring, as you say, that is a risk here still, what would that mean for contagion?
An orderly restructuring.
Forgive me, a disorderly restructuring.
Disorderly restructuring. Yeah, well, disorderly restructuring could be could take place when the decision makers in Greece decide to get out of the Eurozone. This is something that is still on the table. I don't think that it is could be easily done. There are many technical difficulties, and the contagion then would be much higher and much stronger than anything else we observe in orderly restructuring.
How would you quantify the likelihood of that happening?
I would quantify the likelihood of that happening relatively low.
Like 20%?
Less than that. I would say that everybody in the Eurozone thinking about how to solve the situation in Greece is trying to prevent something like that from happening.
All right. I mean, German Finance Minister Wolfgang Schäuble has been saying that Greece is on a knife edge. He says that if this government cannot meet the terms of its aid, that they will have to get financing without the Eurozone's help. What are the implications of that for the September 29th vote on the next tranche of aid for Greece? That vote will take place in Germany, of course.
Well, regarding the vote on the 29th of September, I think that the government, including the finance minister, is trying everything to get a support by the ruling coalition parties.
But it doesn't, I mean, when you hear Wolfgang Schäuble saying, listen, they're not meeting their targets, and if something doesn't change soon, we're not going to approve the next tranche of aid, it doesn't bode very well for that vote, does it?
Well, I think that this is some of the preconditions that the coalition parties are supporting the course of the government. They must be sure that the government is not paying for what's going on in the Eurozone in any case. So there must be rules that must be met. And when you come up with a contractual agreement, each side has to fulfill its contract, its part. And this is something that the representatives in the Bundestag and the Parliament really observe very critically.
I mean, Merkel's coalition has been defeated or lost votes, indeed, in all 6 state elections this year. She's in a tough situation at home. I mean, there is less and less room for her to maneuver in terms of Germany's role in participating in not just the next tranche of aid for Greece, but in future bailouts.
Yeah, well, she has lost the state elections on the one hand, and there is a very strong pressure from parts of her coalition parties from Bundestag on her regarding the Eurozone problems. But on the other hand, she has proved to the public that she can cope with difficult situations in the past. And I'm pretty sure that she's going to manage that situation in which she is at the moment as well. Also, the Christian Democrats have a record to be able to come up with a compromise which is finally supporting the Chancellor in the end. And I also expect that from the Free Democrats.
I mean, German threats that Greece won't get the money unless it meets its fiscal targets are escalating in that country. Does this make a default? I don't want to use the word inevitable, but it seems as though the risk is steadily rising.
The risk of default is steadily rising because, well, on the one hand, you have the reductions in GDP growth that will make it increasingly difficult to meet the targets. And on the other hand, stronger reductions in expenditures stronger increases in tax revenue will be difficult to achieve for the Greek government as well, because the public is going to oppose that increasingly heavily.
Mr. Feld, if I can get your reaction to Jürgen Stark's resignation. It is the second German resignation from the ECB Council within 7 months. How much more important is this? How is this going to impact Mario Draghi's position? How important is it for him to be seen as a conservative, or at least to be seen as more of a hawk when he comes to the presidency in November?
Yeah, I'm always a bit reluctant to comment on these personality issues. I'm also trying to respect personal reasons when personal reasons are there, and I don't know of anything that might have happened in the personal realm to Jürgen Stark as well. This is something I must say in advance. So there might be something in the personal area that is really affecting, or has really led to this decision by Jürgen Stark. But on the other hand, we know that he, as a hawk, opposed the bonds, the program of buying Italian and Spanish bonds that the ECB started this summer. And it is not a good policy, intermingling fiscal and monetary policy goals in the ECB.
I understand. Thank you very much indeed. Apologies to have to cut you off there. Lars Feld, advisor to Angela Merkel.